So the 25th Space Shuttle mission is now on the way after more delays than NASA cares to count. This morning, it looked as though they were not going to be able to get off.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded during launch on live television, killing all astronauts on board. The tragic incident was met with public shock and disbelief that sparked an extensive government inquiry with the purpose of determining what went wrong. The resulting report is an important case study in organizational communication and the effect unreasonable expectations can have on safety procedures. Trouble began in the 1980s when President Reagan expressed his vision of NASA becoming an economically self-sufficient satellite deployment operation and began putting pressure on NASA to conduct an ambitious quota of launches each year. Driven by a rigorous launch goal, NASA managers compromised on safety and suppressed the warnings and objections of engineers, ultimately leading to the explosion in 1986. Engineers determined the most likely cause of the explosion to be a failure of key O-rings within the solid rocket boosters. Engineers at NASA contractor Morton Fiocco had long expressed strong concerns about the integrity of rocket booster joint O-rings for the past 8 years. They had designated the O-rings as a critical one feature, meaning it was a failure point with no backup that could result in the loss of life or vehicle. On the day before the launch, these concerns came to a head when the temperature was forecasted to be below the minimum temperature that the booster rocket was tested at. Safety concerns sparked numerous meetings between engineers and Level 3 NASA managers, but it was determined without the support of a single engineer that the risk was acceptable and unavoidable. The Level 3 managers never notified the Level 1 or 2 managers about the safety concerns. When a disaster like this occurs, it is important to determine who or what is to blame in order to avoid history repeating itself. The author of this article argues that while it is easy to assign blame to the Level 3 managers for not notifying the Level 1 or 2 managers about safety concerns, the blame actually lies with the structure and culture of the organization. A basic finding of the organizational specialist is that bad news rarely flows up in an organization unless efforts are made by the top to create a culture where all information flows freely. I agree with McKenna in that the Challenger disaster was the result of complex organizational issues motivated by external pressure that led to a failing of necessary safety procedures and ethical behavior. The failure of the O-ring was a symptom of misguided leadership in an organization that had lost sight of the ethical and safety practices of the preceding Apollo lunar program. The disaster also highlights the ethical dilemma of whistleblowers. Do the engineers share a small portion of the blame for not taking action against the decision they knew to be dangerous? In my opinion, the answer is no. Whistleblowing is a last resort effort that is more similar to an act of reckless heroism than an act of ethical duty. If an organization the size of NASA needs to be saved from itself by a whistleblower, the problem extends way beyond the responsibility of the whistleblower. Whistleblowing also carries an incredible toll that is unfair to expect from an innocent engineer that has done his duty by notifying his manager of the problem. In the process of searching for another article, I found it very difficult to find any opinions that drastically differed from the one presented in McKenna's article. I ended up choosing the article Engineering Ethics Case Study, The Challenger Disaster by Mark Rassow because it offered an in-depth analysis of the O-ring failure and gave much more context to the choices made by everyone involved in the decision-making. It is important to realize that the Space Shuttle is an incredibly complex machine with thousands of parts and engineering challenges to consider. Not every concern raised by an engineer is extremely vital, and it would be impractical for managers to address each concern effectively given the pressure they were under. Rassow paints a more complete picture by taking into account the factors and challenges that motivated decision-making and shows us that the mistakes made by NASA were human mistakes that anyone could make. Giving the reader all the information makes this disaster a more valuable ethical case study that can allow us to better recognize the signs of poor organizational structure. Overall, both articles contain very similar assertions and offer very objective insights into the causes and contributing factors of the disaster. I believe that the tragic and shocking nature of the event inspired an incredibly thorough investigation and resolved any questions, leaving little for speculation. While it is unfortunate that it took such an extreme event, I think that the Challenger explosion enacted real ethical change with effects that can still be seen today.